We are having Betsy Ladyzets, who has also been part of the education programming before and has been a mentor for several years now. She is the co-founder and managing editor of the Sick Times, which is a publication focused on COVID-19, long COVID, and public health. So very happy to bring on Betsy. Go right ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Is it okay if I
Yes,
replace the screen share?
yes.
Okay,
Can't figure out
I'll
how to
do
close
that.
it, so I'll let you take over. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have an external monitor, which I feel like is always helpful for this kind of thing. Okay. My slides are very basic also. It's just like so Shell and Courtney asked me to talk a little bit about my background and my experiences kind of on both sides of mentoring and being mentored. So Yeah, I'm Betsy, she, her pronouns. So to talk a little bit about kind of my journey into science writing, I think like many people who get into this field, I kind of came at this from being interested in science and then realizing that research was not quite for me. So in college, I double majored in biology and English, and I had the opportunity to try out a couple of research projects, research internships, and kind of quickly realized that I didn't feel like I really wanted to be so devoted to one research project in the way that some of my friends who've now gone into like grad school for science or medical school were interested in. But I really like learning about science. I really like talking about it with other people. And so that was why I kind of found my way to science writing. A couple of things that I did in college that I found really helpful kind of in terms of setting me up as a science writer was that I was a student journalist and I also worked in my college's writing center, which gave me some experience in editing and coaching, which has been very helpful now that I do a lot of editing. Um, Also in 2019, I was an NASW travel fellow to the AAAS meeting. And actually, Shell and Courtney and I were all in the same cohort of that program. So it's really nice to sort of come full circle with them in this way now that they are co-chairs of the education committee and they work on all of this programming themselves. That's really great. And then after I graduated college, I worked for a couple of years at a small company called Stacker, which does data journalism. And I actually had the opportunity to start and lead science and health coverage there. Um, and then I started freelancing a little later. Really, for the last few years, my work has been very focused on COVID-19 and long COVID for a variety of outlets in a variety of places. Um, but kind of just focusing on that topic, I think as someone who has lived in New York City and experienced, the lockdowns and the really intense first waves of the pandemic, which still ongoing here in New York, I just really felt compelled to cover this topic and just haven't stopped basically. So a lot of my career has really centered on independent projects, which I always like to highlight when I talk to people because I think it's an option that people might not necessarily think about, but I think is really important and really kind of needed for folks like yourselves who are still getting into this, still considering this career path to consider. Much as, freelancing can be really great and finding great positions on staff at different outlets can be really great. I think we all know that a lot of those opportunities are can be harder to find, can be more competitive these days than they were even perhaps when I was getting started in this field a few years ago. And so I think looking for ways to kind of create your own opportunities, both when it comes to places to write as well as like networking and mentoring, I think is really important. Um, so for me, the my main independent project for a while was called the COVID-19 Data Dispatch. It was a blog and newsletter that I started originally on Substack, like many other people started Substacks back in 2020, and then I expanded it to a full website. Ended up doing some original reporting, covering a lot of different topics related to COVID-19 data. And then that kind of led me to my current project, which is the Sick Times. a nonprofit publication that covers long COVID, COVID-19, and related chronic diseases and health issues. So we are really focused on service journalism, kind of serving people with long COVID, which we do by publishing both news and essays and op-eds from people in the community. And thanks to some success that we've had with fundraising and receiving grants, I'm very lucky now to be, I say mostly full time. I still do some freelancing, but mostly the sick times is kind of the bulk of my time these days. And we are also, as a publication, very interested in supporting newer writers, particularly people with lived experience of long COVID and related chronic diseases. Um, yeah, I was trying to think about what advice I would maybe give to myself from a few years ago, and this is a few things I came up with. At the top is just being curious. I think as people interested in writing and journalism, we all have this naturally, but I think it's really something to lean into as you're thinking about considering maybe different career options or different ways to proceed. Like asking people whose careers interest you or whose paths interest you about how they got there, what they did, what they found helpful. And also being curious about different topics or different skill sets. When I first learned about data journalism, back when I was in college, I never thought that would be something that would be my main job for a while, but it really just came from like being curious about an internship opportunity. And I've also found that a lot with, learning about like entrepreneurship skills, learning about investigative skills, how to file public records requests, as well as just taking opportunities to cover different topics. Even if something seems kind of unfamiliar to you, maybe you're like a grad student doing research, I would challenge you to not just write about topics that are familiar to you from your research, but also think about what else you might find interesting or what else you might find compelling. Um, and then the next thing I put here is to know your values, like think about um, what you find important in terms of both your coverage and how you operate. Like, is it really important to you to be transparent in your work? Is it really important to you to maybe uplift like diverse sources and diverse voices? I think sometimes if we're working on kind of limited capacity, you can't always do every story perfectly, but there are maybe a few things that you can really like hold true across all of your work. In my case, I would say this is like the topic that I've chosen to focus on, and also kind of looking at things like diverse sources I find really important. Um, Building a beat, I think, is always a great thing to think about if you're starting out. And I think this can help you in a few ways. One is if you're kind of trying to make a name for yourself as a freelancer, it can be helpful to sort of have a topic that you are known for, that you might be like reliably available to write on. For me, this was COVID-19 data for a long time, and actually having a newsletter and a blog where I wrote about this topic became really useful for me because I actually, in a few cases, had editors at publications I was interested in writing for, like approach me and say like, "Hey, we know you do COVID data. We have this kind of related topic that we're interested in. Like, would you want to pitch us something, or would you want to write XYZ story?" And that only happened because I had built up this expertise and this reputation as like the person who did COVID data, right? So maybe not everything is going to be as specific and as newsworthy as that particular topic, but there are a lot of kind of experiences like that. Being reliable, also really important. These days, as an editor, I kind of work with freelancers a lot, and the people who I always like working with are the ones who I know they're going to get back to me. They're going to have like a thoughtful response to a question. They're going to maybe be available for an assignment, or they'll let me know that they're not available, and not like leave me hanging for a long time. And similarly, I think going along with that is taking feedback respectfully, looking for opportunities to learn and grow, and also like asking questions when you don't understand an edit. I've had that experience on both sides of the editor-writer relationship. Like if an editor sort of comes back to you with something and you don't quite know whether where they're going or what they want, a phone call can be really great, and sort of give you an opportunity to like learn more about what the editor or what the publication is looking for. But yeah, just like being open-minded, being willing to maybe do another interview, or kind of go back to a source and ask a couple more questions, or like restructure a story if an editor thinks that your original organization isn't working. I think all of that is just really important, whether you're freelancing or like working in a staff position. Um, and then I also think really important is taking advantage of both like existing training opportunities and making your own opportunities. I've been lucky to participate in some great like training and fellowship programs from organizations like NASW. One I wanted to shout out specifically is SHERF, not SHERP, the NYU program, but the fellowship that is a collaboration of CASW, AHCJ, and SEJ. I was part of the first cohort of it a couple of years ago, and it was really great because we got to go to basically all three of those organizations' meetings, as well as getting like mentorship and um, having like a cohort of people who are also early career journalists learning about science writing. So looking out for programs like that, as well as opportunities to attend conferences for free or like get some of your travel covered, as this program is doing with um, opportunities to potentially get a free ticket to the NASW, the Science Writers Meeting. A lot of other organizations do that kind of thing where you can get a fellowship or maybe you can like volunteer to organize a session. And I just think those are such great opportunities. And you could also make your own, you can always reach out to people. One thing that I have done is myself and a friend of mine, Priyanka Runwal, who's a reporter at CNN these days, a few years ago had an idea that there are a lot of journalists who live in New York City like us. A lot of them are trying to do science writing. A lot of them are earlier in their careers. We should all try and be friends. So we made sort of an informal meetup group and we set a loose goal of trying to meet in person once a month and like talk about stories, talk about things we were working on. And many of us are still friends. We don't meet quite as regularly as we would like, but we do still meet from time to time, and we have a group chat where sometimes we talk through issues. Um, so I think that's just like a thing that we created out of a couple conversations. It didn't take a ton of resources or anything. And you can do that very easily, whether in your geographic area or um, people who maybe cover like a similar topic to you, or have some other kind of common interest in some way. And then the last piece of advice is to look out for mentors who model the career you want. I think often, or maybe this is just me, often maybe we think about mentors who cover like a similar topic, or can offer advice sort of on like a beat. And that's obviously really important. But I think also thinking about career structure, like somebody who maybe in my case, I always look out for people who have started their own publications or who have had some success in the realm of like entrepreneurship in journalism. Um, and so that's kind of what I've looked out for. And I'm always very grateful to people like Siri Carpenter of the Open Notebook, who sort of checks this box for me and being someone whose career I really admire, and a few other folks over the years. But yeah, I think just thinking about that progression and not so much like the topic, but more so um, the way they approach their work or the way they've gone from maybe reporting to editing or editing to leadership or anything else in particular that you're looking for. Um, yeah, so that's all I had in terms of slides. I know if folks have like questions or anything, I'm happy to answer.
Thanks so much for that, Betsy. What's your favorite thing about mentoring?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think just learning from other, like, I feel like it's really a two-way relationship in a lot of ways. I've always learned from the people who I've mentored. Um, And especially talking about things like story ideas, I think it's always really cool to see what people who are maybe a bit newer to this field might come up with um, when they're not maybe so entrenched in like covering a particular beat as folks like us who are maybe further a little bit further along. I think I'm like mid-career these days, but yeah.
Hi.
I
Can I ask a question?
think so.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we've got
Okay.
a few minutes, so please ask questions.
Thank you. So, I wanted to ask about the story length that we've been given here, 500 to 750 words. And I want to ask you, Betsy, what's your experience like? What I always see is that really deep reporting obviously takes a lot longer than that. So, what's this kind of story like really? What should it be aimed at? What level of detail and what kind of story should we be considering writing for this project?
It's a good question. I think this story length often is more of a news story than like a really in-depth feature. So you're maybe thinking about maybe a couple of a couple of scientific papers on like a related topic, or um, or maybe one paper, but it's really significant in some way, like a big review or something kind of covering an important development in a field. Um, or perhaps like sort of a small piece of like a topic in science. I'm trying to think of an example of a story I've written recently that was that length. Um, a few weeks ago, I covered for the Sick Times. This is more of like a health story, but it was sort of a policy development in the state of Minnesota. The state has like a unique program supporting research and communication on long COVID. And there was some news out of the state legislature that they were going to potentially cut funding for the program. So I wrote a quick piece about that development, like talked to a couple of advocates who were involved, as well as getting comment from like a legislator. So it was maybe like three-ish sources, and I think that was about 700 words. So maybe that is helpful to give you an idea. It's like a specific development in something. Um, but certainly, like if you have an idea that's a bigger feature, I think maybe like picking a chunk of that and like maybe using it as an opportunity to interview like a scientist whose work you're interested in, can sort of be fodder for a bigger story.
Hi, I also have a question if that's okay. Wait, sorry. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you
I'm
so
not
much.
the
That was
timekeeper here, but I think it's
sorry.
okay.
Um, that was really great. Thank you so much. So what I wanted to ask is that I think it's like super admirable that you were able to kind of like start your own thing and just like really for a topic that you were interested in. I guess my question is how, if you were to want to like start your own thing, like how did you establish yourself and like get the word out and get people to start reading the Sick Times as opposed to like the alternate path of like joining an already established thing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in my case and also my co-founder Miles' case, we had both built up a reputation from freelancing, and from writing about long COVID and COVID-19 and related health issues. So people in the community who would be sources for us kind of were familiar with our work. And when we announced that we were starting a new publication together, we got a lot of responses from scientists and advocates being like, this is great, like we're gonna read this. So I think having that kind of reputation a little bit was helpful. And I also had a reputation and like a little bit of an audience from the COVID Data Dispatch, which was my prior newsletter project. I had an email list of, it was like a little under 2,000 people, I think, who had been reading my weekly updates for at least a little bit of time, and sort of knew me as a journalist who covered COVID. And so when we started the Sick Times, I basically like gave all of those folks a heads up and an invitation to like subscribe to our newsletter there. So it was like not a huge audience. Our audience has grown a lot since then. But still it was helpful to kind of like immediately have like a newsletter list. So definitely starting something like that. It doesn't have to be super time intensive. It doesn't have to be super like original reporting. But I've seen a lot of writers have success with that in terms of having a newsletter or having a blog or being like intentional about how you use different social media platforms to get a little bit of an audience and to kind of get a reputation of like this person writes well about this topic. Um, or maybe not a topic, but maybe like a specific area of science, or maybe it's a focus on um, covering things in a particular way, like doing data journalism or multimedia, whatever.
Thanks for that, Betsy. I think we probably have time for one, maybe two more questions if anybody else is curious about something. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I guess we can move on to breakout rooms. Thank you so much, Betsy. Great presentation and great advice.
Thank you.
All right.